Welcome to Gross Anatomy. Hey, Lauren, are we live?
We are live, Dr. Cohen with Gross Anatomy Podcast.
And I'm Dr. Jason Cohen, and Lauren Taylor also says on our Zoom, I see her name also says Jason Cohen. So she's Jason Cohen and I'm Jason Cohen. And today we are joined by Dr. Sandy Heck, who I only met once, but I just felt like you just said when we just said hello to each other, I just felt this connection, and I also felt envy, and I felt all the emotions, and I just said, let's get this guy's story. So welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm real good to chat. Happy to chat with you guys. This is going to be fun.
Cool. The way I got to meet you, Sandy, was I was in the OR operating and at Marina Del Rey Hospital, and someone who works for you was trying to get me to use a product in the operating room. And I have to confess, I am not usually an early adopter of that. You know, they talk about all that stuff, you know, who's what on that graph, you know, an early adopter, a late adopter, someone in the middle. I wish I could say I'm an early guy, but one thing about me is I'm always willing to meet the people and look at the stuff. Whether or not I'm going to use it right away, I must confess I'm not necessarily an early adopter, but I very much liked the feel and the idea of the product. And then I said, I'd like to find out who owns the company. And he's like, and that's you. And I didn't know that. So he's like, yeah, we could set something up for you to meet the owner of the company. And I don't even know if, I think he may have mentioned that you were a doctor, but I didn't really know your story until we met at the office the other day. And I've been hoping that we were going to do this sooner because I've missed you. And I really am hoping that this is the start of a something. So tell me, so you're a doctor?
Yeah, well, I'm not a practicing doctor, but I did go to medical school and completed the beginning of a residency and got licensed. I went down a slightly different path of the medical entrepreneur and the business side. And so, and I've been doing that for a while. So I don't, it's tough to consider myself a doctor, but I am an MD.
But wait, so when you were a kid, did you always think, hey, I'm going to be a doctor? Or did you think I want to be an inventor? Or did you think I want to be a business guy? Or what did you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't, my father was a doctor, but he never encouraged it. In fact, I think he, in retrospect, subtly discouraged it.
What kind of doc?
A dermatologist.
Ah.
I think he wanted me to appreciate that it was, not for everybody. And, just because he was doing it shouldn't mean that it was like necessarily the right thing for me or an expectation for me. So it wasn't until I was in late in college where I decided that it did really align with my interests, my strengths, but actually so late that I couldn't go right to med school after college. So I had to take a year off to do my, the MCAT tests and finish up pre-med stuff at the end.
So where'd you go to college?
I went to Stanford. And
so what was your major going to college?
I chose late in my sophomore year, I chose human biology. And it sort of let me keep the door open for a lot of stuff.
And you went to college thinking, I'm going to do something in the sciences, or you had
something
no clue?
In the sciences, engineering, sciences space, for sure.
Got it. And so you went to Stanford. The draw was there like a Silicon Valley thought to the, oh no, was that even going on back then or not really?
It was going on. It was like the late 90s when I entered, and it was just beginning. Google was like a thing people talked about on campus, but it hadn't taken over the world. But no, none of that was on my mind. You and you're from the New York, East Coast area, and I'm from Connecticut. And so, that's what I knew growing up. And I was applying to schools, and I applied to that one, and I was looking at that brochure, and it had those palm trees on it, and now we're in Southern California, and so we get used to this stuff, but you probably remember back when you were younger, the idea of living somewhere where the weather was always nice and there wasn't really a winter was almost on the edge of inconceivable. It was like, how could someone live in a vacation land all the time? And so I saw that maybe I could get a taste of that. But it was.
So here's a confession of mine. I'm going to admit this. Stanford was also my top choice. But for me, it was an insane major reach. Like, I don't even know. I shouldn't have even been applying to Stanford because I couldn't even have gotten into, the next level below that. But for me, Stanford was the dream school. And so I applied to Stanford. I got rejected and probably immediately. They probably just sent it right back and said, we're not even going to read this application. But that's interesting. Two East Coast guys thinking, and it was kind of the same thing for me, but I didn't know anything about it. It just seemed like the coolest place to go and be because it was in California.
Right.
Did you know anything about it other than it was a great school in California?
Yeah, I knew it was a great school, obviously. So I figured, if I went there, it would position me well for whatever else I wanted to do. But otherwise, I didn't. In fact, it was expensive to go visit all these schools, and Stanford was very far away from where I was on the East Coast. So I didn't even visit it before I went. The first time I ever went to Stanford was my first day of freshman year. So I really didn't. I had a sense of it from what you can read and what you sort of picture California being like.
So then when you got to school, you said, hey, I'm going to do something in the sciences.
And Stanford was very generous in terms of how they let you set up your major. And for human biology, you could design, you had to do a few basic requirements, but then you could design your own focus within the major. And so I put together a set of classes that I called evolutionary genetics, and they allowed me to call that my major. And so that's what I was studying through into like probably late junior year until I decided I'd do pre-med.
And then you graduated and you had to do post-bac stuff, or you got all your prereqs done?
I got it all done, but just at the end. And so I didn't take the MCAT until that year, like that the very end of senior year. So I couldn't have applied. So I had to apply that following year after college.
So you took your MCAT, and then what?
I got into Cornell Medical School. So I went back east and started med school. And that's where my story with the entrepreneurship all begins. I was in med school, and I just out of pure good fortune and luck had a roommate also in med school, obviously at Cornell, my class. And he had been a surgical tech before medical school, which is already like sort of a rare path, you probably have met many surgical techs, and they're great. They're real smart. They're real hardworking, but it's very hard to get off that track and then go back to finish your post-bac stuff and then get into Cornell Medical School, and so that just speaks to, the level this guy was operating at. I should give him a shout out. This is Alex Gomez, my roommate then and my business partner through all our business stuff. And
Alex, was he an older guy? Like, had he done a bunch of stuff, or he
was my age. Yeah.
Same age. Got it.
Yeah. I think he just was someone who, wasn't afraid to, engage and work and get a job. Partly I think it's because his family ran a family like restaurant bar when he was young, and they had all the kids working. So from an early age, he knew about hard work and putting in the time. And so I think that gave him, a good foundation for all that.
So he was your med school roommate or your classmate?
So he was a classmate, and then we got along real well. And then the second year of med school, we were roommates. And he was saying to himself, I've been in a bunch of cases as a tech, and here I am at this Ivy League med school, and I'm still seeing the same problems in the operating room. One of which was that when you take in I don't know exactly what audience you have for your podcast, so I don't know how technical you want me to get, but
we're all over the place.
All over the place. All right, so in laparoscopic surgery, they've got these long, thin cameras that they introduce into the abdomen through small holes so they can do the surgery. But when you take a camera lens from a cold operating room and you put it into a hot, humid body, and the inside, it's going to fog up, and these lenses can get dirty inside there. And so they'd constantly be interrupting these surgeries to pull the camera out, the lens out, clean it.
And what year is this?
This was, I'd say, the end of our second year, when because it was really him who came up with the idea. He started tinkering around, and I was at the beginning just watching this crazy roommate of mine start to build these little prototypes.
What it was the 90s? The late 90s? Early?
No, we graduated in 2006, so
okay. So early 2000s.
Yeah, early to mid 2000s. Yeah, so he was like, there's got to be a better way, because it was very disruptive. Like you were operating before we introduced our little scope cleaner, correct?
Right. Yeah. Sure.
So the product now.
And I was actually, when I first started, so I started doing this in the mid to late 90s. The laparoscopic equipment that we were using, there was no such thing as high def, and I'll tell my students and residents, it was almost sometimes you could barely see, like you'd be making up what you're seeing, and you'd be working, and it would be like, it's crazy, the visualization, the optics, the technology that we have today compared to what we were learning on when I started doing it. And certainly fogging was a crazy issue all the time. Fogging and just getting dirty all the time.
Yeah. I mean, even when it wasn't dangerous, because it can be dangerous if you can't see what's going on, but even when it's not dangerous, it's very disruptive. Those cases, no one wants unnecessary delays while the patient's under, and the surgeon might be under stress. There's a bleeder somewhere. The last thing you want is to be cleaning the lens. And so people had a lot of like makeshift solutions. It was basically the anti-fog solution you'd put on your scuba goggles. They had that in the operating room. They'd have buckets of hot water to put the scope in to heat it up, so it would be closer to the temperature of the body. But these were really makeshift, and I could go into all the problems with them. But he had he had a vision for how this thing could be, a little device could solve these problems. So at the beginning, he was working on this, and I was just sort of watching and giving my advice and helping him. But then, this continued for a couple of years while we continued to be roommates. And so I got more and more involved. And then.
And this is when you were second year students, or you were already third years?
It was third year when it got that's when it became something that really had teeth, where maybe this isn't just a little thing that we could play around with. This could be actually a product. It could be
But as a second year, at least when I was a second year, we didn't really get into the OR at all. So did you have any idea what the hell he was even doing and dealing with, or as a second year?
I only did because I personally had a real interest in laparoscopic surgery. I thought it seemed so cool, the way that people were operating, like it was a video game almost. I couldn't believe how neat the whole thing was. And so I took advantage of opportunities to shadow surgeons. So yeah, you're right. It was before we did our formal rotations, but I was already trying to get in the operating room, see what these cases were like. And so I was seeing the problem, but I didn't have the perspective he did. I didn't see that it was a universal problem. I could see that it was a problem at this particular place, but he had the confidence to pursue this because he had seen it, everywhere, this problem. Right. So then, we just got busy trying to make it into something that was, a prototype that worked. And then.
And what was his idea? What was the thing?
So it doesn't, if you were to look at it, the original prototypes, it wouldn't look so different. It was like a little baseball-sized chamber with some hot fluid in it that would warm up the tip of the camera. And then a
battery-powered thing.
Well, at first the idea was that it could be a chemical reaction, sort of like your ski glove, you might have those little warmer pouches, something like that. Also playing around with the idea of it being plugged in, so you could just have electric power from an outlet. But eventually, as further prototyping went on, we realized that it really had to be batteries to give the surgeon everything they really needed in the operating room. We're working through prototypes, patents. Looking back on it now, I think we had this illusion that maybe if we had a bunch of good patents and prototypes, maybe some company would license it, but that was obviously not going to happen. That became clear pretty early. And then the idea was like, oh, well, maybe if we get FDA approval for this thing, then it'll be an FDA approved device. And then, some company will license it or acquire it or something. That also was very naive. And so that was around when we were at that stage around when we graduated medical school. And so him and I both decided that instead of going right to residency, we would take a few years off and see if we could actually launch the product and build the business.
Wait, but let's back up. So other than the fact that you're a smart guy and you went to Stanford, you're busy in medical school. A, how the heck did you know what you were doing? But B, how do you even have the time to do what you were doing?
For whatever reason, you could find the time. I mean, I found med school, a challenge, but residency was much more demanding. I mean, finding time in residency at least as a general surgery resident, which is what I did. There's no hope. You barely have time to do what you're expected to do.
Right.
But in med school, it's a little bit more, 9 to 5. You've got classes, then you got some homework, and then you've got your evening and your weekends. And so you had time. We felt like
so you guys were hanging out late at night and on weekends, like tinkering and stuff?
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of tinkering in the dorm room. It was all tinkering in the dorm room for a while. Yeah.
And did you have, how'd you know how to make it? Were you partnering with, or did you find mentors or people to kind of help you along?
Right. So, the first prototypes, really early on, Alex was just building with stuff he made at Home Depot, really just rough things just to get a sense of how it would work. But once it seemed like this is something that, maybe could be a product people might want, we engaged a company that's of a type called a contract manufacturer. And so these guys have on staff engineers and regulatory specialists and all that other stuff that you'd need to launch a product. And so instead of having to hire your own team, they can do it for you for a fee. And so we outsourced that, turning the rough prototypes into actual prototypes that could go through the FDA approval process. That was through these other guys that we hired.
And then how do you know you had something worthwhile? I think when we had talked, you mentioned that you developed a relationship with one of the surgeons early on or something that kind of, helped as a mentor and friend and partner almost. So how did you find that? How do you manage that?
Yeah, because I knew I was into minimally invasive surgery even before we started this project. That was how I chose my advisor at Stanford, my medical student advisor. I picked a laparoscopic surgeon who I really respected. And so I was communicating with him. I was showing him the stuff, and he was like, "Oh yeah, this would be great if it
at Cornell."
Was at Cornell, yeah. Alphonse Pomp, Dr. Alphonse. He was great, and for a while he headed the minimally invasive department there. He's retired, at least from clinical practice now, but he was. He went above and beyond what the mentor role really probably should be, because he really helped me out, and also maybe in retrospect, the most helpful was that he supported my decision to not go to residency, which was very unusual. You know this too. Out of the 100 kids in our class at Cornell, the only people that didn't go to residency right afterwards were me and Alex. And as far back as I went to the residency match list, there wasn't a single person who didn't go to residency. And maybe some people have done it since, because now business is a little more of a common pathway, but I'm sure it's still incredibly rare. So, he could have said, be a doctor, worry about this later. It's let it be something that you play around with, but you've invested so much time and money and student loans. I had a lot of those, go do a residency. But he saw something in it and in us, and he supported it. So he was one of the people that gave us a lot of confidence that maybe, we had something that surgeons would want. And he also introduced me to another laparoscopic surgeon, George Fursley, who still operates in Staten Island, another huge guy in the field of laparoscopic surgery, helped build in the field just in general, but also gave us a lot of help and feedback as we developed this thing. And so that was another bigwig surgeon who said we were on the right track. So that was probably, those two guys, in my mind, were the ones that gave me the confidence that we had something.
Were they letting you try the stuff, your different prototypes in the OR? Were you able to try it in the OR or
no? Not until much later, till we had FDA clearance and we had sterile devices and all that stuff. But they helped in animal labs. We did an animal lab. And also we'd bring prototypes to their office and they'd play around with them.
And did your mentor guys say, listen, go try this, and if you fail, we'll take you back? Did they give you that kind of cushion at all, or no?
No, there was none of that confidence. But I mean, what did happen was after we built the company up and things were going really well for about 3 years after med school. And then I realized if I don't go back to residency, then I'll never go back. So that's actually after 3 years, I reapplied and I was accepted at Cornell to do a general surgery residency.
And the product and this product was selling, you mean, at this point?
Yeah, it was selling all around the country. People were liking it.
And you were making money. Making money. Yeah, it wasn't the hit it is now, but it was growing and people liked it. And I felt like this business can keep going without me there every day. I didn't need to be there. We had, like at the beginning, Alex and I were doing everything. We were the sales reps. We helped with everything, but at that point, we had a team that could do a lot of stuff. So I went back and I did the first 2 years of general surgery residency at Cornell. And then I went off to do a research year and I got more involved again with the company. And then I did another research year and was still more involved with the company. And then at that point, the company was really growing and it was getting real big and things were at that point really exciting, just being close to the company and, feeling, it was the thing that we had built out of our dorm room. And it just had a thrill that I wasn't getting out of residency. And I thought maybe I wouldn't get out of practicing medicine. And so once I started my third year of research, already the program was probably like, this guy's never coming back. I think they were about to start using the product themselves. So they probably were like, and so then I told them, I don't think I'm going to be coming back. And so then I was full-time with the company. What was that decision like, deciding I'm not going to be a clinical doc? At the time, there was a little bit of relief because it was very hard work as a resident, and in the business, the lifestyle was much easier, and it seemed like in a lot of ways the thrill was greater, and the way just at the trajectory the business happened to be on at that moment. But I did also harbor some guilt because you're taking a spot in medical school and a spot in residency that someone else could have had. I could have finished my training and been another surgeon. But I've been able to let go of that sense because the product ended up being, so successful that, I feel like our contribution was significant enough that it would have been hard for me to make that contribution as a surgeon. When we eventually sold that company, but after residency and I went back to the company, we kept growing it for a few more years. Then we sold it to Medtronic. And even when we sold it already, it was almost like a quarter of the big hospitals in the country were using the product. At this point, basically every hospital uses our product. I mean, not just in the US, around the world, most cases, if it's in the developed world, almost every case uses our product or something almost identical to it now. Certainly for robotic, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you regret selling it when you sold it? Do you wish you had held on to it longer, or you think you sold it at the right time?
Well, that's a money question, really, because at the time, Alex and I had very little money, and we weren't paying ourselves a lot in terms of the salary because we really wanted to make sure the company had the resources to keep growing and not fail. And so, and they paid us well. And so there was this huge relief when we sold it. We were like, oh my God, I can't believe it happened. How did this happen? Finally. But they ended up growing it so big that, had we, held on to it just another couple of years, it could have been worth 2 or 3 times as much. But you never know. There could have been a problem too. There could be, there's a million things that can go wrong. So I do strongly feel like we made the right choice at the time, but in retrospect, it turned out to be such a big product that, who knows?
And when you sold the company, did you guys have to stay on? Did you want to stay on, or you sold it and you were like, bye-bye now? How did that work?
Yeah, we positioned ourselves to be there to help as much as they needed, and they took advantage of that to the extent they wanted. But they weren't looking for our operation. Medtronic, they have their own executives, they've got their own sales force, they even have their own manufacturing, and so they mostly wanted the rights and the know-how and the sales channels that we developed. But they weren't looking to keep us on for a long term.
What was the company name and what is it now? Did they totally change the product name? Like what is it? Did they change everything?
Yeah. So the company was called New Wave Surgical. And yeah, as soon as they bought the company, they got rid of the name and they just kept it with Medtronic. And we had called it D-HELP, which was an acronym for Defogging Heated Endoscopic Lens Protector.
Thank you. Everybody calls it D-HELP, and I have no idea what that even means. And I know. So what is it? Tell me again what it stands for.
Defogging Heated Endoscopic Lens Protector.
D-HELP. Okay.
D-HELP. Yeah.
Nice.
But apparently their focus group felt like that wasn't the best name. And they had a bunch of people in some, whatever focus group type things a company like Medtronic uses. And they determined that they would change it to Clarify, which I have to admit it's a pretty snazzy name. We couldn't have come up with it. So it's called Clarify now. And I think that it's at least as good a name as ours is, and they're happy with it. So I'm happy.
I got to tell you, I've never heard anybody refer to it as anything other than D-HELP.
Oh, good. I like that.
I've never heard it be called Clarify. Everybody calls it D-HELP, or they call it the Igloo because it looks like an igloo.
It looks like an igloo. Yeah, there's a couple other a little more crass names people have for it, but yes.
I mean, you have to feel so proud that you have all of these surgeons using your product, something you created when you were in medical school, which Dr. Cohen has talked about a lot. Like, you don't get a lot of business classes, or they don't help you like start your own practice. They don't give you any of those kind of classes, but you guys did it somehow yourselves without taking those kinds of classes. I mean, that's huge.
And that's the envy. I envy him.
I appreciate that. But, it's not like an invention that most people see. It's hidden in an operating room. And, even in the hospital, very few people are in a sterile operating room. So, most people have never seen it or don't know anything about it. But I did have this really pleasant experience recently in a hospital where with our new product, which is this device that's also for laparoscopy, but instead of making it defogged and better visualization, it helps close the port sites that they use, and also does a targeted anesthesia injection at the port sites so that patients can, after their surgery, recover without opiates and be less likely to have hernias at the port sites. And
port site in English is the holes that we enter someone's abdomen through.
So when we sold the company, after that, there was no reason or even permission for me to be in an operating room. So for many years, for several years, I was never in an operating room after that. And now with this new company, when you start a company like this, it's real important to be in the operating room at the beginning. I mean, to the extent where Alex and I will often, certainly with the last company and even with this one, we'll pretend that we're just normal sales reps. We won't pretend we're inventors or owners or anything, because surgeons are such nice guys. If they find out that it's your product, they're going to say, "Oh, it's great. We love it. Thanks so much. It's the best." But we need honest feedback. So,
do you really find that you find? I thought it's the other way around. I thought people are going to critique, especially surgeons, are going to critique it more if they know, right?
Not if it's a fellow surgeon. I think they see a little of themselves in us, and they want it to be successful. And the way you wouldn't critique a colleague, there's that element at play. And so we go in disguise, and so we could get real honest feedback. And it's real important to get that when you're launching a product. And I think a lot of products that people launch fail because the people who are responsible for conceiving of the product, engineering it, designing it, they're only hearing what their sales reps are telling them. They're actually not seeing it in use and understanding the feedback directly. And so we still do that with this new product. And so I've been in the OR a bunch, and I get to see doctors use, and this happened just a couple of weeks ago. I was in San Diego in some cases at a hospital that's going to start buying the product. And I was in there and watching them use it. And they were just using our old product like it was a thing that had been there forever. No one, because back in the old company, if I was in there, it was like a new thing. I was showing them about it. I was teaching them. They were like, oh, what's this? Now they were just using it like it was a scalpel or a suture or something. They used it. They needed it. They were in and out of it, using it the whole case. Without even communicating, everyone in the staff knew how to turn it on, when to pass it up. And it made me feel pretty warm about it. But normally I don't get that experience because it's hidden, no one sees it. Even the patients, they're unconscious. They have no idea it was used.
Yeah, but it is pretty cool. That must be an amazing experience. So from the time you guys conceived of the idea to the time that it was first legally used in an OR, how much time was that?
I'd say that it was first really used in an operating room in 2008.
Just keep coming up with things you want to invent. Like how are you seeing these problems?
Right. Well, this one was actually the basic idea of it was conceived of by a different surgeon, a urologist, and for our new product. And he brought it to us thinking, oh, maybe you guys could help me with this. And it was a real great idea, but it was still pretty rough, and so, we had to work on it a bit to get it to where it is now. I think that one of the skills that we developed over the course of our last company was learning about what it takes to make an idea a good product, a successful product. There's tons of ideas and inventions, but is it going to be a successful product? And there's so much that has to go into that. And, we got good, I think, at identifying what those things are. And so, we get presented lots of ideas.
Okay.
People know our story. They've seen it. A lot of doctors and surgeons particularly come to us saying, hey, I got this idea. What do you think? A lot of them are good ideas, but they won't make a good, successful product. But this one would. And so we pursued it, and that's where we are now.
That's interesting. I didn't think about that. Like, people are just constantly, because you're successful business owners, you had a huge product launch. So people come to you with their ideas, and sometimes you have to be like, no, that's probably not how you say it, but you're like, I'm not sure that this would work for these reasons.
Exactly.
What's the newest product right now? I just want to make sure I have the.
It's called M-Close, conceived of by a urologist. The concept behind the product. And his name was Manoj. He was a urologist in New Jersey. I don't know if you ever, Manoj Patel. And he passed away from leukemia shortly after bringing the product to us and us getting started. And so he never got a chance to see us launch it. He never got a chance to see how it's really blowing up all around the world. We already have sales.
Wow.
And I think the product's really going to change laparoscopy just like the last one did. And he never got a chance to see that, which I think is very sad. But we put M there for him. It's the M-Close device.
That's awesome. And how long from conception to being in a body did that take?
Well, I don't know exactly how long he had been working on the concept, so I can't speak to that. But when he brought it to us, we had to do R&D on it for a couple years, and then did the FDA stuff. And so it was a shorter time frame because we were better at it, and already the product had come with some development, but maybe 3 years or so.
Is that normal these days? Like if you go to someone who's good, like say, oh, I have some idea. How long will it take me to be able to get something going if it's a viable idea?
Sure. So I have this conversation with surgeons all the time that have their idea. And so one thing they've got to determine is what FDA classification applies to the product. If it's class 1, you have to go through the whole development process and do it the proper way. And that could easily take a couple of years. But once it's done, you can launch it. If it's a class 2 product, you have to get FDA clearance. And so you're going to go through an approximately similar amount of time of development. And then there could be about a year or so while the FDA reviews your application. And then if it's a class 3 product, you've got to do basically clinical trials on it. And so that can be many years.
Okay. And so now you've got M-Close and you're promoting that. Is your goal to just like keep that one, or would you also sell it to like a bigger company, or you're thinking about that, or are you also creating another product while you're doing this? I feel like you probably have another product that you're ready to launch. Am I wrong?
No, you're 100% right. We've got another product that we're in the late stages of developing, and we've got a few other ideas down the line. what we might end up with is a company that's sort of like a platform that develops a lot of innovative stuff for the operating room, because it's something we've gotten good at. But that doesn't, you can't rule anything out. If the right partner or acquirer came around, and the terms were right, we could work something out, I'm sure.
And is it all your stuff is all usually laparoscopy based so far? So
far, and for anything that we are developing now it's just a space we know real well. We have the familiarity with those cases. Our sales reps know those doctors. They're in those cases all the time. It's an easy one for us.
One thing that I always find odd and unfortunate, I think, is as doctors, as surgeons, we know what we're doing. We know our own wheelhouse, but there's so many toys that other surgeons, other types of surgeons are using, whether it's an orthopedist or a gynecological surgeon, that we don't know what they're using and how they're using it and how they're applying it. And for all we know, there could be amazing and the orthopedist, there could be amazing crossover using already invented devices to kind of either fiddle with it a little bit or use it for something. And I think it's a major shame that there's no cross-pollination of that at all. And have you ever thought about that? Like, it'd be great, like, I figure, like, as a surgeon, but I never have the time to be able to be allowed to go watch these guys do their thing, watch those guys, and then have you encountered that or thought about that? And
you bring up a great point, because there is an element of that if you were to do a bunch of cases in other specialties and see how they do it, you would probably come out with a new perspective about how maybe you could do things better in your case. But I would say it's unlikely that you would just say, whatever he's using I'm going to carry that right over. I think that's actually what used to be, when laparoscopy started in the 90s or so, when it became sort of mainstream, that's what laparoscopic surgeons said. They were using stuff from other fields because there was no laparoscopic specialty with their own stuff. And so they were forced to use whatever other people had and make it work. And I think what happened to the benefit of laparoscopic surgeons is that now there's more and more stuff that's just right for the laparoscopic surgeons. But of course, there's nothing new under the sun. It's always something that evolved from something else in one of these other specialties. And so I bet you would see stuff and you'd say, if that was smaller or sharper, if they changed it in some way, maybe if you could hold that in one hand instead of two, I'd like it. So yes, I think you're right. There is room for that. But I think, a lot of the challenge for laparoscopy has been that there weren't things that were specific for laparoscopy. For example, our kit, the device that we sold with our defogger, I think I shared this story with you when we were met before.
Yeah.
Should I share it again, or should I?
Yeah, I love that story. Yeah.
Yeah, it's for Lauren's sake, I'll share it. But they have these trocars, which is the hole. It's this sort of a straw that you hold the hole open with, so you can put your instruments in and out of the body. And as you bring instruments in and out, blood can get along the sides of this little sort of straw. It's called a trocar. And so no matter how perfectly clean and defogged you get the camera, if you put it back in and it has a drop of blood in, it's dirty again. And you got to take it out and start the whole thing over again. And we felt like we had this perfect cleaning, defogging device, but there was that Achilles heel. No matter how perfectly we solved that problem, if that trocar was dirty on the inside, they would be in trouble. And there was nothing they could use. And so they were just using other things. They had their forceps, they grab a ball of cotton, they try to shove it in there, but it didn't really fit. They risked losing the ball of cotton in there. I mean, there's valves in the trocars that could be damaged. I mean, the whole thing was, it was poorly designed for that solution. And I was just in a case one day, like pretending to be a sales rep, selling our defogger, watching this surgeon struggle with this. And I thought to myself, my God, we could do something that's like what he's doing, but made specifically for laparoscopy. And so we invented this, I think if you looked at it, you'd be like, oh, it's a giant Q-tip, but it's especially designed with swabs of a particular size on both sides so that it can clean out the full range of trocar sizes. And it's got some other features, but it's basically a thing that can clean the inside of the trocar. And, for 20 years, no one had brought that, they were all trying to hack together something from other types of surgeries and other cases when it just needed a slight modification so that it could be just right for laparoscopy. And so
yeah, that Q-tip is perfect. I almost like it sometimes better than the D-help. Are you ever involved in teaching or mentoring or doing anything like that?
I mean, I do love it. And I have been involved in some, entrepreneurship programs where students, are developing a project, and there's often like a panel, like a Shark type panel. And I'll be on it to, judge the projects or give feedback. I've guest lectured at some college classes about, how to go about it. But it's only a handful of times. It's, not a big thing I do.
Yeah. I think that's something that's definitely lacking in certainly medical education. I think it's in all of our education is the entrepreneurship, business, all of that. And Lauren and I talk about it a lot. And it's great. It's a regret of mine. I wish there were more of that.
No, it's amazing what you do. Like, we've had doctors on that also do other business stuff. Like, we had a Dr. Edna Ma, who went to Shark Tank with her idea because, that's the way she knew that's the way she could think to do it. But we never had anyone with like all these FDA approved products. So it's very cool to hear your story.
I love it. Sandy, unfortunately, I have to go to the ER and do some laparoscopic surgery tonight, remove an appendix. But thank you so much for being a guest. I feel like we're just scratching the surface. I definitely want to hopefully keep talking to you outside of this realm and see about trying to come up with ideas and products and things like that too. So thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. And then I guess just as a final question that Lauren and I like to ask, you want to ask it, Lauren?
Yes. Is there, I don't know if you have time, but any like TV shows, movies that you're watching, anything you recommend to our audience?
Sadly, I don't watch much television.
It could be a book. It could be
a
podcast.
Book. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how appealing this would be to anyone, but I was recently someone recommended someone whose tastes I really respect and appreciate. Recommended this book about JFK, and at first I thought, I know everything about this guy probably, but only because he's recommended so many books I really loved that I sat down and read the whole thing. And it really was fascinating. Perhaps if someone has read a whole biography about him, there'd be a lot of, repeat stuff, but it was really interesting. It was called JFK and the author's name is escaping me, but it also was about America during that whole period. And JFK was sort of the anchor for the book, but it was really a fun history lesson about America and also about this colorful family as well. So I just finished that book about a week ago. I enjoyed it a lot.
Cool. All right. Well, Dr. Heck, Sandy, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me. It was real fun.
Thanks
a lot.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
That's it for this week. Thanks for listening to Gross Anatomy, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can check out more episodes on the evolving sights, smells, and sounds of medicine. Gross Anatomy is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition.